Welcome, everybody. What an exciting day today. I want to welcome our guests, Dr. Fletcher and Dr. Finnerty from the school committee, to come down today to honor our special guest here today. Mr. Mahar, our special guest as well, coming down. Thank you, sir. And the next gentleman up here, we all know, Mr. Donnelly, is going to introduce our special guest for today, and then we'll turn it over to him to answer your questions. I just want to say a couple things, kids. Since I've come to Normandin, I've never met so many famous people. Okay, I'm very blessed. And the first one is Mr. Donnelly himself. You know, when I met him, I said, I'm in the presence of greatness, and he's got a lot of connections, and he knows a lot of people. But the reason he can get them to come to speak to us is because he's authentic. He's honest, he's hardworking, he's an unbelievable teacher, and he's good for us, and he's good for our school, and he's good for our kids. So people want to come here, all right, and visit you because of him. So just remember that. I want to thank the teachers in the pod as well for organizing this special day. It's really an honor to be here. I want to thank Dr. Bono also for joining us today, and our special guests from the media to come down because it is exciting. We often talk about learning in the classroom, and we talk about authentic learning. What does authentic mean? It means real. How do you apply that to real life? Well, today is a perfect example, probably the best example I can give. You're studying government and history and civics, and now you have somebody here to talk to you about that, someone from another country. And you can make comparisons and contrasts to how things are done in somebody's homeland versus how we do things here in our country. So it's really an exciting opportunity for us. So I'm very excited for that. I want to turn it over now to Mr. Donnelly to introduce our guests. So thanks, kids, for coming today, and I'm looking forward to your questions. Mr. Donnelly?
Well, first I want to thank Pod 81, really. I mean, our kids are always great, and give yourself a round of applause. We do. We do a great job all the time. And also, not only me, but there's more teachers here from Pod 81 who do really, and we have a great team of teachers here. I mean, we have Mrs. Freitas, Mrs. Almond, Mrs. Sanders, and Mr. Rosen, and we work together really well. And I think it shows when the teachers like each other, it shows to you because we like you. And I'm sure you see we like each other, and we work as a team. And we're very proud of our kids, to be honest with you. And today I'm really proud to have somebody who from my own country, who's here to visit us. And I told you before, he's visiting Normandin. I don't think he's visiting any other school. He's been here in the United States. He's come to say a few words to you, plus he'll answer some of your questions. And at the minute when Mr. Burkett talked about our history, we're talking about the minute, we're in 1775, we're talking about the British Parliament, about trying to get the British out of the United States and how we're working to that. We had no taxation without representation, so we weren't represented. That's why we're trying to become our own country when we're moving towards the Declaration of Independence. So there's some similarity between what we're doing now and what's happening in Ireland at the minute. So I think for me to have someone from the 6 counties or and even Donegal, which is next county to me, I think I'm really honoured. I'm honoured, and I can't thank him enough. Him and his wife Mary is here to come here and talk to you and answer some of your questions. So I'd like to welcome Pat Dougherty, MP, Sinn Féin for West Tyrone. Okay.
Thank you, Chris. It's a great honour to be here. I wasn't quite sure what to expect, but when we got off the train this morning, Chris was explaining that you saw a great crowd of kids and you wouldn't ask difficult questions. But when we came in here, we stopped in at the class that was teaching history about the American Revolutionary Wars and how America eventually got the British out of America. Unfortunately, we're still in the phase of our struggle that we've still to get the Brits out of the north of Ireland, and they have left the southern part of Ireland. And it's sometimes very hard to explain 800 years of Irish history vis-a-vis Britain in 30 seconds, but I'll have a go at it anyway. Britain, or the United Kingdom, is made up of 4 countries: England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland. And there's been a great tension between Ireland and England for most of that 800-year period. But in the 1900s, there was a rebellion in Ireland for independence. And at that time, you have to understand that all of Ireland was part of the United Kingdom. And there was a general election just after the Great War at the end of 1918. And at that stage, Ireland returned 105 members to the British Parliament in Westminster, which was something that the Americans way back in the 1700s were never allowed to do. But my party, Sinn Féin, stood on a platform of total independence. And out of the 105 available seats, they won 78 of those seats and established in January 1919 their own parliament in Dublin. And the British response was to send in the army. And the Irish responded to that by the emergence of the Irish Republican Army. And there was a conflict that lasted from 1919 to 1922. And then there was negotiations between the British and the Irish, which led to the partition of Ireland, to a civil war within the Republican struggle, because many people refused to accept the partition of Ireland. That civil war was a disaster. It only lasted about a year. But the Southern Irish government, 26 of the 32 counties of Ireland, set up their own parliament, and by the 40s had become a republic. But the north of Ireland remained part of the United Kingdom. But there was massive discrimination in the north, in jobs and housing and all aspects of life. And in 1968, the civil rights movement emerged. It took a lot of succor from what was happening in the civil rights movement here in America and what was happening on the streets of Paris with the students' revolt around that period. And, you know, when you reflect back on that, it had a very, very simple slogan, which might now be regarded as very sexist, but the slogan was "one man, one vote." And that civil rights movement was quite brutally repressed again by the British Army, where they introduced internment and they arrested people without trial. Hundreds and hundreds of people were put into internment camps, and they shot dead 14 people in Chris's home city of Derry in January 72 on a civil rights protest. There was a massive conflict broke out between the Irish Republican Army and the British forces, and that continued up until 1994, where the IRA called a ceasefire. And in 1998 we entered into negotiations with the British government, the Irish government, but all of this was facilitated and structured by the American administration in Washington, where they sent over Senator George Mitchell to chair all of the meetings and to conduct the business. And we came to an agreement which became known as the Good Friday Agreement, because it was Good Friday 1998, which set up a new set of structures in the north of Ireland, that there would have to be power sharing, which meant that you would have direct access to the cabinet, the assembly executive, which is the equivalent of your cabinet, in direct proportion to the amount of seats you won. That there would be a committee system in the new parliament that would have a lot of control over what happened. That there would be a north-south dimension, that politicians in the north would have to relate on a structured and organised way with their equivalent members in the south of Ireland. And that there would be what they call an east-west relationship, that there emerged what became known as the British-Irish Parliamentary Assembly, where politicians from Britain, that Scotland, England, Wales, would meet on a regular basis and on a structured basis with politicians from Ireland, both north and south. And that power-sharing assembly and the peace process is still ongoing. We also had a huge dilemma around the question of policing, because policing was a very militaristic policing, not as you would understand policing here. And a special commission was set up under Chris Patten, now Lord Chris Patten, and he made a series of recommendations to do away with the old RUC and to bring into being a new police service called the Police Service of Northern Ireland. That report was accepted by all of the parties, including our own, but when the British moved to put it into legislation, because the report is just that, it is just a report, it has no legal basis, but when they moved to bring it into legislation, they took out huge chunks of the report, and we refused then to accept it. And for 10 years we fought politically with the British government to bring it back to the point that the report made at the start. So now we have an acceptable police service in the north that's entirely accountable. We have a power-sharing executive in the north, and we have an all-Ireland dimension that politicians in the north of Ireland have to relate to politicians in the south of Ireland. My party has the second biggest party in the north. We have the biggest party has 35 members. We have 29 members. There's two other relatively strong parties that have 16 and 14 members each, and there's a party known as the Alliance, which has 8 members, and there's 1 member of the Green, and I think 4 or 5 independent members, mostly from the Unionist or British tradition. In the south of Ireland, we also have 14 members in the Parliament there and 3 members in the Senate. And of course, Westminster, because it still has direct control to the northern part of Ireland, there is 18 constituencies, of which we hold 5 of them. And while we stand and fight the Westminster elections, we stand on the basis of abstentionism, because it would be anathema to us as Irish Republicans to take an oath of allegiance to a British monarch. So we won't take the oath, so they won't give us the salary. But we demanded, when Tony Blair was Prime Minister, that we would have our offices in Westminster, and they eventually conceded to that. And we also demanded that we had the right to retain and staff our constituency offices in our own constituencies, and the British conceded to that. But there is a facility in the Good Friday Agreement that allows for a referendum around the question of the reunification of Ireland. And that currently is the core of some of the politics we're involved in. We have said publicly to the British and Irish government, we want that referendum in 4 or 5 years' time. We want a big debate in the interim period to tackle whatever issues have to be tackled, whatever challenges would be thrown up around the reunification of our country. And that is currently where the situation from my perspective is. There is also a big demand that we deal with the past. The legacy of the conflict from 1969 to 1994 was horrendous. There was all types of shoot-to-kill policies emanating from the British government, collusion with the loyalist paramilitaries, imprisonment without trial, and we want all of that dealt with. That is the second big issue, that's the tension between us and the British government. In economic terms, the Southern Irish economy is going through a very, very difficult period, quite a massive recession. There had been, for generations, very strong immigration to Ireland, mostly to America. But around the 50s that stopped, and emigration would have been to places like Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and indeed England and Scotland itself. Currently this emigration has become of the order, and you have to remember that the southern population is just a bit less than 5 million, maybe 80,000 young people a year leaving, mostly to Australia, some to Canada. The northern economy isn't that strong either. And we're dealing with all of these political situations against a quite tough background of bad economics and bad employment situation. Education, north and south in Ireland, is at quite a high standard. It's quite well regarded internationally, although there are problems from some of the more deprived areas. particularly in the north and particularly in the unionist tradition. And it's an issue that we are trying to tackle as best we can against the backdrop of sometimes not having the finances to put in place the different types of schools. In my own constituency, and I'll finish on that, there's a new concept emerged, and education in the north of Ireland is very divided between the Catholic sector and the state sector, which is largely the Protestant sector. And the new concept is that there was a massive military barracks in Omagh of some 140 acres, which when the British Army withdrew, they handed it over to the Assembly in Belfast. And the concept is that it would be turned into an educational campus site where the 6 secondary schools would retain their own identity but co-locate and share as many facilities as possible. And on Monday of this week, I'm going to MIT in Boston because they have shown a big interest in some aspects of this educational campus site, and I'm going to meet with some of the professors there to try and forward that concept. So whatever questions you might want to ask me, I'll try and deal with them.
What's it like being Irish in the part of the British Parliament?
Well, it's not that difficult, but I could tell you maybe a funny story. When the House of Commons, and they have what they call the House of Commons and the House of Lords. When the House of Commons granted us the right to have our offices, shortly afterwards, some members of the House of Lords decided to have a St. Patrick's Day celebration. But the House of Lords had never lifted the ban on my party. So as I was walking through the corridors of Westminster down to the House of Lords, our constituency representative over there, Jane Fisher, said to me, technically this is illegal. The ban has only been lifted by the House of Commons. And I said, well, being an Irish Republican would hardly be the first time I committed an illegal British Act. It's okay, we can deal with it. We've had 800 years of dealing with it.
What is the biggest obstacle you have overcome being part of the Parliament?
The biggest obstacle was actually the one I've just spoken about, the educational campus site, because when it became available, the British Ministry of Defence, Des Brown, and you have to remember the Iraq War was on at the time, wanted 80 million for it. And there was a phrase in the agreement, the Good Friday Agreement, which said vacated military barracks may be gifted to a working parliament. And I was trying to skew the word may to would be gifted, but the actual word was maybe. So I went to see him, and he wanted 80 million, and he said he didn't care whether he got the 80 million from my executive, his treasury, or the open market, but he wanted 80 million. And I asked him why, and of course it was to do with the war in Iraq. So me and him had words, and I said that there was no way he was going to fund his war in Iraq on the back of our peace process. So we had quite a difficult conversation. In the end, we got it gifted, free.
Matthew, question?
How was your childhood life like? How was your childhood life like?
My childhood life? Well, it was great, it was brilliant. I was actually born in Glasgow, Scotland, of Irish immigrant parents who came from northwest Donegal. And northwest Donegal is known in Irish terms as the Gaeltacht area, where their first language is the Irish language, Gaelic or Irish. And English is a learned language. But they had emigrated to Glasgow, and I was the oldest of 8 children, but I always felt very Irish. Didn't feel particularly political, but I always felt Irish. And I met Mary in '67, and we were married in '68. And sorry, we're married in '60s. Sorry, I got mixed up. I met Mary in '60 whatever, and we were married in '67, and we came back to Ireland in '68. And if you want to ask questions about Irish history and politics, Mary has a degree in Irish history and politics. I'm only a politician. So I grew up in Glasgow, going home to Ireland every year for 2 months of the summer holidays to a beautiful rural area overlooking the sea, and a small farm that my parents had left. And every time my granny was sick, I would take an excuse to go over. And so I had a great childhood. And when I came home in '68, I wasn't political. I often say Mary was much more political than me. But I worked in Derry, and I seen the civil rights movement emerging in front of my eyes in Derry. But I was reading history and reading books, and I joined Sinn Féin in April 1970.
Do you think that English should be part of the European Union? Do you think that English should be part of the European Union?
Well, England is part of the European Union.
I think it's right. Should stay there. Should they stay there?
Yeah, but there is a debate in England at the minute. Just to explain, the United Kingdom, which is Scotland, England and Wales and the north of Ireland, joined the European Union at the same time as the south of Ireland did in 1972. But there has always been a debate in England about whether they should stay in or withdraw from it. The south of Ireland, there's been no real debate. After that referendum in '72, it became very, very European, very proactive in all the European institutions. In fact, there's a saying that Ireland, for such a small nation, punches way, way above its weight in European terms. There is a very sort of I don't know what name you would call it. Some people call it quite right-wing. Other people say it's a little England attitude that they should withdraw from Europe. But of course, it's not as simple as that, because Scotland's now looking for its independence and will have a referendum in 2015. And how will that be affected? Wales is not seeking independence, but it has its own assembly, and it hasn't expressed its view on being a member of Europe or not. So it's quite a complicated debate, but in the end there may well be a referendum, and well, it depends on when the referendum is. If Scotland has had independence before that, Scotland will then be out of that. But if Scotland's part of that, then they will have to be part of that referendum, which might be 2016.
Nick, you have a question?
What is the process of passing laws?
The process of passing laws. Well, it's much the same in the Southern Irish Parliament and the Dáil, the Assembly in the North and in Westminster. A bill is brought forward. It goes into committee stage, where the various parties sit on the committee and they debate and make amendments and attempt to make changes. In the Assembly in the North, as it is in the South, when it comes out of committee, it goes into the House, and at some stage, after a long debate, there is a vote taken, and it's either passed or not passed. In England, it probably goes through the similar process in Westminster, except that there may be an extra stage of first and second readings. And then they have this absolutely archaic decision where it then has to go into the House of Lords. Now, ironically, and this is part of Irish history, the House of Lords used to have the power to actually block, but they only now have the power to delay for no more than 2 years. And that changeover from being able to block to delay happened because of Irish politics in the 1880s, as the then Gladstone was moving to give Ireland what was then known as Home Rule, was always been blocked by the House of Lords. But the then Irish Parliamentary Party had enough power or enough votes to help him to change the mechanism in the House of Lords to moving it from blocking to delaying. And that's the extra process that happens in Westminster.
One thing, I love your accent.
Not mine? Yeah.
If you could change something about the structure of your government, what would it be and why?
Oh, well, if I could change it, I would have a united Ireland tomorrow morning. Now, what format that reunification of my country would take is up to a fair amount of debate. But there would be universal suffrage, there would be votes, there would be constituencies. There is a current debate in the south of Ireland that they would change or potentially change the Senate. The Senate is elected in a rather strange way in the south. It's not by universal suffrage where the ordinary people vote. It's county councillors, members of the Parliament, and the proposal, or one of the proposals, is that they should find some way to give the Irish diaspora a seat or a number of seats in the Senate, because it is estimated that there are 40 million Irish Americans in the States. There's probably quite a number of them in South America. There are certainly 2 or 3 million in the United Kingdom. There is millions more in Australia and New Zealand, and people are debating, is there some way that we can give that a representation? Because most of the emigration from Ireland was not by choice. It was created out of hardship or by politics, bad politics. So, apart from the reunification, I think we probably should have less members and bigger constituencies.
Carmel?
What's the biggest difference from Ireland and America that you've noticed since being here?
Well, geographically, it's just massive. It is just massive. I mean, Ireland is very small. Ireland, north and south, has no more than 6 million people. I'm sure there's one state in America might have twice that. The whole transport system, the highways, the trains. There's a huge openness that I find in America, an openness to people saying what they think and involving in debate. I mean, we came through harsh times where you could, if you had a drinking cup that said you supported Sinn Féin or you supported the IRA, you could end up in jail. In Ireland, there was internment without trial, which the British still maintain they have the legal right to introduce. I don't think you would have that type of thing in America, although I know during the World Wars that there was some class of internment because of the countries that were involved in the conflict. But it's the openness and the feeling of freedom.
More questions?
Do 8th graders in Ireland learn about American history?
Do 8th graders in Ireland learn about American history?
Oh yeah, I think they do. Yeah, they would be in broad terms very aware of your Revolutionary Wars, George Washington, the Civil War, all of that type of thing. There'd be lots of documentaries on the history channels and on our own television channels. I read a book. I think it was McCullough wrote the book about your second president, Adams, John Adams.
Anybody else with a question? Okay. Go ahead.
What are some things you like and dislike about the British Parliament?
Can you make that out?
What are some things you like and dislike about the British Parliament?
I hate the politics of the place. I love the architecture of the place. It is stunning architecture. It is. I'm always amazed at, and I'm over there roughly every second week. A lot of the people are genuinely good people, but they have, particularly the Tory party of the Conservatives, they have absolutely no understanding of Ireland at all, none whatsoever.
Hi, I'm Steve Urban from the Standard Times.
Yeah.
Boston College Oral History Project is still being debated about whether or not Boston College should be forced to disclose the contents of interviews with former IRA members and their families.
Yeah.
What effect, if this information does get transferred to the British government or made public, what effect is that going to have on the prospect for continued peace and for reunification?
Well, I think the peace process while at one level it's quite robust at home, at another level it's a delicate flower. And I think the people who partook in this historical project to have people give their account of their involvement on record, I actually think they were quite foolish, but that's another matter. That was their own decision. What has happened here is that the police force in the north of Ireland have, through legal means, demanded access to these tapes, to these recordings. And the knock-on effects of that, God knows where it will take us, but I think it was a very, very foolish exercise. One, for the journalists in question to have given guarantees that they could not fulfill in law to the people who participated. And I think the people who participated were also foolish to have given their stories, because our situation is not over. We have a way to go. The huge advantage is that we now have a democratic and peaceful way to complete the journey, and there is no argument, no need, no requirement, no demand for there to be armed conflict anymore.
Just before we finish, I'd like to thank Mr. Burkett for letting us use the library, and Mrs. Hinchley there, really. I think they went out of his way. Once I asked Mr. Burkett if we were bringing someone over, he really was, he was very enthused about it, and he wanted to make him feel welcome. And for us to give us time out of school, and we've done this with Dr. Bono before in the past, and it's great to bring people to our school, because when they come here and they see how well you did, and they go and spread this, they tell people how good Normandin is. I think Normandin is the best school in the city, and I tell us, Dr. Fletcher said that. I've never said a bad thing about Normandin. I think we have the best kids. I think we have the best students, and we have definitely the best administrators. We do a great job, and it's because of you. And I think today the questions were unbelievable, as usual. They were thought-provoking, so they weren't just little silly questions you made up, and we did a great job. You sat there very silent, you listened. I think it proves that you're young people, and some people say the young people the young people are our future. They're not really. You're there today, and we should talk to you today. We don't want to see you in 10 years' time. But you're today. We should be talking to you about what's happening in the world today, and we do that. And by bringing people here to the school, it helps you to understand how small the world is really, and what you can learn from other people. So I want to thank you, Pod 81, really, for doing a great job again. Thank you. And before we finish, why don't you bring Mr. Burkhead back up again just to do something.
I won't keep you much longer, kids. I do want to reiterate what Mr. Donnelly said, that I'm extremely impressed, but not surprised by your level of expertise in your questions and your research, and your ability to be respectful and outstanding audience. So thank you. I'm very proud of you, kids. I do want to wrap up and thank everybody for coming again, but we do have some gifts for Mr. Dougherty for coming here. So on behalf of Normandin, I want to present you with a little keepsake, and thank you for coming. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. Thank you.